Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We are broadcasting now once again from Dallas, Texas. But last week, of course, we were broadcasting live from the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Nashville, Tennessee. And again, just want to say thank you to those who were with me at the time, Warren and Steve, as well as my wife Suzanne and Susan, who were there as we were doing a broadcast, but also those behind the scenes back here in Dallas, which were Andrew, Doug, and Ivy, that have been so helpful in making those broadcasts taking place. I'll probably be on the road again, but for now we are actually back in Dallas broadcasting all over the country, and I encourage you to pay attention through these 2 hours because we're going to be covering a lot of different topics. First of all, we're going to be talking to our good friend Dr. Carol Swain about a new documentary that you need to know about. Whose children are they? But we also have a link to her website, carolmswain.com, and information about Be the People. So we'll get all of that in just a minute. Luke Moon will be with us later this hour, and we'll be talking about his Phalos project and what is happening there. Next hour, we'll be talking with Andi Buerger about human trafficking, and then we'll wind down before we're done talking about what has happened in Ukraine. As a matter of fact, when we talk with Luke Moon, I know that they've actually done something on Ukraine, Russia, and the Middle East, so we'll probably get into that as well. So covering some important issues you need to know, covering some issues in the news, and as always, encouraging your phone calls if you have a comment or a question. Carol Swain's been with us many times before, host of the podcast Be the People, as well as Conversations with Dr. Carol Swain, an internet talk show. You can see it on YouTube and Rumble. Last time we talked with her, I think we mentioned her book, Be the People, A Call to Reclaim America's Faith and Promise. She has been a professor at Princeton, at Vanderbilt, and as an individual that we love to call on from time to time, especially as we get into some of these issues involving race, or in this case, involving the whole issue of children. And so, Dr. Swain, once again, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you. And it has been a long time since we've talked, because since we had our last conversation, I've published 2 books. One is called Black Eye for America, How Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House. And the other one is Countercultural Living, What Jesus Has to Say About Life, Marriage, Race and Ethnicity, Gender Roles, and Materialism. And I've also, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I just wanted to mention that we do have a link to Black Eye for America, How Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House. And this would not surprise you, but we also have booklets that we make available here on issues like race and critical race theory. So, but again, let's get into some of the other projects, because you have lots of things happening right now, don't you?
I do, and on the personal level, I have given up my podcast and my conversations with Dr. Carol Swain because it was so time-consuming. It was like me trying to make something happen, and I realized that if I'm just a guest on other people's shows like yours and Fox News or One American News, whoever calls, that it's a better use of my time. And I'm doing something with Blexit. They do a series with me called Against All Odds, and it's weekly, and it's on Be the People News, and I get paid to do that.
Sounds good. And again, since you have a little more free time, we're going to call on you a little bit more because this whole issue of critical race theory has not exactly gone away. But I did want to mention that since today we are aware of the fact that this new documentary, Whose Children Are They, is out. And there's an opportunity, as we oftentimes encourage people to do, to find out where it may be showing in their community. We also, of course, have a link to the trailer. It's about a minute and a half long. But this is, if you will, sort of a who's who. And it really is based upon a question that seemed to surface in the Virginia governor's race, and that is, whose children are these? Can parents have some kind of influence in the education of their children in the public schools, or are that just an interference into what the educators need to do? And it seems to me that that ended up affecting the Virginia election, and I would think this might actually affect these midterm elections. Well, what are your thoughts?
I would agree, and it wasn't a partisan issue because critical race theory and DEI, how it's being pushed out there, it affects every American, and the average American, the average American rejects, characterizing people by race. They're not in favor of discrimination, and they don't want their children to be sexualized. And I believe that that is bringing together a coalition of Americans. They may not be in the same political party, but they reject what is happening in our schools and in our workplaces.
One of the things I know that you've talked about is that you've oftentimes had encounters with people that are part of the woke agenda. They may be progressives, secular progressives, and they've really tried to educate you about poverty and being sensitive to racial and ethnic minorities. I expect that as a white person, but I'm amazed that that happens to you as well as an African American.
Well, it's really almost comical, but they have indoctrinated our young people to the point that during my last years of teaching at Vanderbilt, I retired in 2017, it was not uncommon to meet young people that thought they had solved all the world's greatest problems because they had been indoctrinated since middle school, and so they had all the answers. But yeah, I have spoken at college campuses and had young white, usually males, stand up to tell me that I did not understand the sufferings of poor people or that I was wrong on race. And, they can be forgiven because they don't know any better. But they have been thoroughly indoctrinated. They have no critical thinking skills. They don't understand the Constitution. They don't understand that in America we did have a consensus about civil rights. And that was in the 1960s when we passed 3 major civil rights bills. We rejected discrimination against people on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, and sex. And the racial discrimination protects whites as well as blacks and other minorities.
Well, again, one of the other things that you have done is educate individuals if they're willing to read the 1776 report, which, of course, one of the first acts from this incoming President Joe Biden was to cancel the commission. But that didn't stop you from educating. And it seems to me that that's really important because you have been quoted as saying that critical race theory is anti-American. And some people might say, well, then what is America? Well, that takes you back to that 1776 report that you put out along with a number of other individuals that we respect.
But it's not only anti-American; it runs counter to the Equal Protection Clause of our Constitution and the 1964 Civil Rights Act and its amendments. And so I would say that it is illegal, it's unconstitutional, and that people have strong grounds for opposing it. Depending on how it is manifesting itself in the workplace or in the classroom.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk just a little bit more about this documentary, Whose Children Are They? Because starting on Monday, March 14th, and that's the date today, you can get tickets to these, and this is another opportunity to hear a little bit more about Whose Children Are They? Exposing the hidden agenda in American schools. And, of course, one of the participants, of course, is Dr. Carol Swain. So we're going to take a break and talk a little bit more about some of those issues. And if you'd like to join us, we'll open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
As I've been out speaking, one question surfaces with some regularity. People wonder if what happened to the truckers in Canada could happen to citizens in the U.S. I always acknowledge that anything can happen in this country if we aren't working to defend our liberties, but there is an important difference between the two countries. We share a great deal of similarities in our language and even in our legal and political structure. Although there is a border between Canada and the U.S., it is a relatively easy task to move across the border. One country feels like the other country. The difference can be seen in how the two countries treat political rights and liberties. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms grants their citizens various rights. The U.S. Declaration and Constitution acknowledges the existence of these rights, and it may seem like a small difference, but it makes all the difference in the world. To put it simply, if government gives you rights, then the government can take them away. All it takes is an emergency for the government to suspend them temporarily or even permanently. Our Constitution doesn't grant you rights. It acknowledges that those rights exist and government cannot infringe upon them. The Declaration makes that clear, that rights come from God because they were endowed by Him. They can't be set aside as easily as they were in Canada. But perhaps you're thinking that we did see many of our rights set aside during the pandemic. That is true. We let it happen. But we still do have a constitutional government with several judges in our federal court system willing to protect those rights. Unfortunately, many of the liberals in government today are willing to turn our country's governmental system into one that looks more like Canada's system. That is why we need to evaluate the candidates running for office this year. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. Carol Swain, again, former professor at Princeton and Vanderbilt, and we are talking about a number of issues. First of all, we have a link to her website, also one on Be the People, and most importantly, a documentary which is available now, Whose Children Are They? Exposing the Hidden Agendas in America's Schools. And I thought we might, for just a minute, Carol, talk about some of that, because there are all sorts of projects you could involve yourself with, but this is one that you felt was very important, and let's, if we can, give people a little bit of an idea of what they will see when they go into a theater.
Well, I can tell you that CRT has consumed my life and a lot of other people, especially since the pandemic. And this particular film interviews a lot of teachers, very brave teachers that are challenging what they're being told to do. It has parents as well as some of the students testifying to what they were exposed to, and experts on children. And it's not just about critical race theory, it's also about the sexual agenda too. And all of these theories and concepts that they're exposing our children to, they're rooted in Marxism. We call it cultural Marxism to distinguish it from economic Marxism, which divides the world into oppressors and the oppressed. And pretty much it is an ideology that is bringing down, it's lowering the educational quality that our children are receiving compared to children in other parts of the world where they're not being indoctrinated and socialized in the same way. And it's anti-American. It is divisive when it comes to race relations, and it involves a very sexualized curriculum for small children as young as kindergarten. And in case you missed it, this is not in the film, but last week it was reported that KinderCare, the largest daycare provider in America, has an LGBT agenda for 4-year-olds.
There you
So
go.
that's where we're headed. And with this documentary, we are, and I'm a participant in it, we're challenging, this whole notion that government has the right to take our children away from us and control, what they are taught, not just what they're taught, but they're also making it possible for children to begin the gender transitions, reassignments. They're pushing the transgender agenda, as well as just sexual content. Parents almost have no rights. And so the question of whose children are they? First of all, they're God's children. And second, they're the children of biological parents or adoptive parents or parents, who have responsibility for their training, their education, their upbringing. They do not belong to the state. They belong to the people who love them and who are charged with taking care of their most basic needs.
When I've had conversations with some of the people say, well, no, the government has a compelling interest. I said, yes, but just think it through. Let's talk about the issues you just mentioned a minute ago. Explicit sex education. Sometimes they have school clinics where they would be able to have a pregnant girl go and get an abortion without her parents' knowledge, or gender reassignment surgery and those kinds of things. If there are any complications, who has to pay for all of that? Either the emotional or medical expenses or conflicts. Well, the parents do. So there's this idea that no, the parents don't have any rights, but the moment there's any problems with anything that the government has done, the parents have to pay the price. Now, moving back into your area, the argument is, well, just teaching this idea of critical theory, of classical Marxism, taking some of the ideas that came from the Frankfurt School. Well, that's just helping them understand the issue of race and racial relations. No, what it tends to do is label some kids as oppressors, and they then become sometimes very depressed, even suicidal. It labels other children as victims, and then they start with a view of privilege. And again, who has to pick up the pieces for that? It's almost always the parents. So on the one hand, they say parents have no rights. On the other hand, they expect the parents to pick up the pieces once the damaging ideas in these public schools are actually foisted upon the kids.
And I can tell you, too, that the suicide rate leap among children, it's affecting all races. And I think it has to do with what they're being taught and what they're not being taught. I believe that just confusing kids as young as 5 years old about their gender, telling them that they can change their sex, has to create all kinds of confusion that most of us never had to contend with. But they are targeting kids at younger and younger ages with an aggressive LGBT agenda. Most of us are focused on critical race theory. That's where our attention is. In the meantime, they are advancing other dangerous theories, such as the critical queer theory, critical feminist theory. And with critical queer theory, they're pushing aggressively the LGBT agenda. And they have children's books. They're not teaching cultural Marxism and CRT in the same manner that we teach it at a university level. They have people that are steeped in those ideas that have written children's books. Often those books don't go home with the children, that they use them in the classroom. They take them up at the end of the class. And teachers have guidelines where they're supposed to ask certain prompting questions. And this whole social-emotional learning component that many schools have adopted, that is also a part of critical theory, because it judges kids based on whether or not they have enough empathy for certain kinds of people. If they don't think in a particular way, if they question what they're being taught, they can be downgraded by teachers who are trying to indoctrinate them.
Let's talk about what we can do. And one of the callers wants to talk about that in South Carolina on the Good News Network. Sue, thank you. You are on with Dr. Carol Swain.
Dr. Swain, I can't even thank you enough for bringing this to the forefront, okay? I mean, this was flipped on all the parents during COVID when everybody got homeschooled, if you recall. Everybody found out. I've done law for over 2 decades, and I have a simple, inexpensive way, doesn't involve lawyers, and I would really appreciate if you start singing this song, file claims on their surety bonds. School board members and the superintendents in every county and in every state is required to carry a surety bond. You file a claim on their surety bond, and I can almost guarantee a 99% backpedaling reaction.
Okay, let me just go real quickly because we're tight on time. Dr. Swain, have you heard about that?
I had not heard of that, and I would like to know more about it. In my book, Black Eye for America, we have 2 chapters, and this is not a long book, on how to fight back. And one is parents need to know what it is, where it came from, CRT. They need to challenge the legality and constitutionality of it in education and the workplace. They need to do what they've been doing, organizing grassroots movements to elect school boards, city council members, mayors. They need to build broad coalitions that cut across racial, ethnic, and partisan lines. They need to use multiple strategies. They need to educate their church leaders, because many church leaders confuse social justice with biblical justice. And they need to pressure corporations, big tech companies, monitor state and local agencies, and develop alternatives to CRT and DEI. But you can't do that if you don't know what it is.
Let me again mention for Sue or anybody else calling, if you want, we have a link, of course, to carolmswain.com, so you could maybe share some material. Let me also say that we have in the past, of course, promoted the book, Be the People, A Call to Reclaim America's Faith and Promise, and we'll put up information on Black Eye for America, how critical race theory is burning down the house. And so we have all of that information, or some of that will get put up in the next few minutes on the website, and that'll give you some of the links and some of the connections there as well. And of course, don't forget the 1776 project that I think was so well done, and sad that it was one of the first things the incoming president wanted to get rid of. But Dr. Carol Swain wanted people to know about the movie, which again is now just coming out. Whose Children Are They? You can watch the trailer, about 1.5 minutes long. You can find out information about the tickets. And of course, we have all sorts of links to the various websites you're involved with. And it's been too long since we've had you on, so let's do it again real soon.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, it airs tonight, and you can show it in your churches. Just go to the website, whosechildrenarethe.com.
That's all you need. We have some links, and you can find all that on our website, and we also have information on how to order tickets in case you need any of that. So let's take a break. We are going to move on to another topic, so you just have to hang in here because these are going to be moving pretty quickly. Once you know about the Philos Project, and this is Luke Moon will be with us in just a few minutes. We'll get a conversation. Actually, one of these things we're going to talk about is anti-Semitism, which they've been addressing, and then, of course, the whole issue of Ukraine, Middle East, and much more. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Back once again, we're going to be talking about what's called the Philos Project. We'll get into more of that in just a minute. We have some links to it on our website. And we bring to the microphone Luke Moon, who is the Deputy Director of the Philos Project, individual that has been a missionary with Youth for the Mission, Youth with a Mission, and that has been for 12 years. He also has his Biblical Studies degree from the University of Nations and a master's degree in Global Politics from Regent University, and is an individual that joins us now to talk about this project and some of the broadcasts that they have put together. So, Luke, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You have talked about a couple of things, one of which I'm holding up right now, one of our booklets on anti-Semitism, and I know that you've done quite a bit in that regard, so I thought we might start there because that was some of the material that we had available to us, but also when I went to your website, saw you've also done one on Ukraine, Russia, and the Near East, and that is something that is on everyone's mind. So lots of topics, but before we get into it, tell us a little bit about the Philos Project, and we have a link on our website, but also people can go to it directly if they go to YouTube and follow some of the links. But how did it get started?
Thanks, Kirby, for having me. I really appreciate it. Back in 2014, at the height of ISIS rising, there was I was joined by a friend of mine, Robert Nicholson. The two of us launched the Philos Project, and we sought to kind of elevate the conversation about the Middle East as a whole. Focused on Israel, focused on helping persecuted Christians in the region. We saw that oftentimes the discourse around the region was not helpful. It tended to be bombastic, and people were pushed into one side or the other. Either you love the Jew and hate the Arab, or you love the Arab and hate the Jew. And we started to try and break that apart. And we also saw that, Israel, while, a nation like every other nation has problems, it is a place where the church is growing. You have freedom of religion, free press. You can say and do just about anything in Israel, and that's not what is happening in the rest of the region. And the Islamists at the time had this saying, first the Saturday people and then the Sunday people, right? First we kick out the Jews, and then we kick out the Christians. And that was happening. I mean, it's sadly has continued up until this day.
Well, again,
we started in...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we see the same situation is that in some respects, Jews and Christians haven't worked together until more recently, and it's easy to divide people and then to take them on. But if we're united, that's sort of a different kind of a response that would happen to the Muslim world coming against Jews and Christians.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think you have, at the time, there is this backdrop of this ongoing civil war between Shia and Sunni Islam, right? As Arab nationalism collapsed, this civil war took place. And yet, really what you had with ISIS was this resurgence of this kind of fervent, just anti-Semitic and anti-Christian rhetoric, and it was driving the Christians from the region, and it already driven the Jews. And that to your point that Christians for most of the last 2,000 years had an antagonistic relationship with the Jewish people. Really, it wasn't until the last 70 years, and perhaps even the last 30 years, that Christians and Jews have begun to see each other as possible allies, as possible friends. I mean, philos means friend in Greek, and our whole aim was to try and just foster friendship, and actually foster friendship with potentially friendly Muslims or other religious minorities in the community, in the region as well, because just like everywhere else, not everybody over there is out to get us, if you will, right? There's room for pluralism, and there's room for religious freedom and rule of law, and we should be advocating for those things, because it's much better to have a pluralistic Middle East rather than a monolithic, homogeneous Islamic Middle East. We should encourage lots of people to live there.
So again, this is part of the Philos Project, and you can find out more by going to our website, pointofview.net, or even type it in if you know how to spell Philos, Philos project. You can find it. But one of the things I did want to talk about is this idea of anti-Semitism. We wrote this booklet about a year or two ago. I've said, Luke, that I probably need to update it because there have been so many additional examples of anti-Semitism, even not far from where we're broadcasting today in Dallas, just one down the road, where a synagogue was held hostage. And when you look at the FBI statistics, hate crimes are up. But the thing that oftentimes is not mentioned by the people that are quoting that, it's the hate crimes against Jewish people that are up. The anti-Semitism is really at an all-time high in Europe, and it's certainly reaching unprecedented levels here in the United States. What have you found?
that's 100% true. And, one of the things that I have often asked by my Christian friends, Luke, like, why should I as a Christian care about anti-Semitism or even like more than other forms of hate or other forms of religious bigotry? And, actually, Kirby, I put it in a place in that first principles category, because the Jews were the people by which God brought his moral revelation into this world, and the world hates them for it. And, just as in first principles, I'm pro-life, I'm pro-family, and I'm actually pro-Jewish, right? Because we know about life and the value of a mother and father, and we know against that hatred and racism are wrong because of the revelation that we got from God that was given through the Jewish people. And I think it's important for Christians to recognize that it actually it's a deeper issue than I think most people realize. For hundreds of years, thousands perhaps, the Jews have been the scapegoat of the world, right? If you were against communism, the Jews started communism. If you were against capitalism, the Jews owned the banks. If you're against Hollywood, the Jews own Hollywood. If you're against newspapers, the Jews own newspapers, right? And right now, the world's obsessed with human rights, and the UN Human Rights Commission has a standing issue with Israel. Every other nation gets a pass except Israel. And I think it's because there's something deeper going on there. And I think it's important for Christians to recognize that and stand with the Jewish people in there whenever they are in harm's way, when they're struggling.
And again, when you talk about something deeper, I think we as Christians know what it is, and that is that if there's anything that Satan wants to come after, and if there's anything the world wants to come after, it's someone that is actually part of the Jewish race. Because if you get away from it for just a minute and just look at it from a logical point of view, almost 8 billion people on this planet, only about 18 million Jews, about 6 million in the United States, about 6 million in Israel, about 6 million in the diaspora, hardly any at all. When you look at the whole Middle East, Israel isn't really bigger than New Jersey, and it is surrounded by massive land area. And so for so much of the world to have focused on Israel, or so much of the worldly people to focus on a few Jewish people, doesn't even make any sense unless there's kind of a spiritual issue behind it, don't you think?
I 100% agree. I mean, I think that's what we see. I think there's an irrational hatred of the Jewish people, and I think it's because of, to your point, there's something spiritual going on. I think it's hard to see. I mean, I think, Augustine looking out his window, in the 4th century, seeing the Jews scattered around the world, and he could say, see, those Jews are scattered because of their disobedience to Jesus being the Messiah. And yet, right now, Jews are coming back to that land from the north to south, east, and west, back to the land that was promised to their ancestors. And you got to think, wow, okay, something's going on, and certainly the devil is not going to take a blind eye to that. But also, I think sadly, too many Christians are caught up in not looking at things through that spiritual lens. Because if you as a Christian, I think it's hard for me to just look. If I look at Israel, it's this, the time and chance and the minutiae of international relations that caused Israel to be formed in 1948. Yeah, maybe, but maybe it's because God's up to something and he still has a plan for this world, and he uses nations to achieve that plan. And I think we got to be spiritually aware when we look at Israel and when we look at why the world hates the Jewish people.
Let's take a break. And again, you can go to the philosproject.org. Also, they have a Philos Action League, which was actually established to really gather Christians to stand in unity with our Jewish neighbors and to really stand up against anti-Semitism. Again, one of the topics we address here on Point of View, and I thought that would be appropriate. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about what is happening at the Philos Action League and even the Philos Project. And then just a few comments, if we can, about what's in the news these days. Ukraine, Russia, but how does that relate to the Middle East? We'll talk about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Time for a few more minutes with Luke Moon. We're talking about the Philos Project, and if you'd like to have information about that, you can go to our website, pointofview.net, or just go to philosproject.org. And also, if you scroll down, you will see that we have a second link I want to talk about in just a minute, the YouTube channel on the Philos Project. But just before we talk about this most recent conversation about Ukraine, Russia, and the Middle East, I did want to, for a minute, Luke, have you identify the Philos Action League, because you have been involved in a number of ways, and people sometimes say, okay, well, I can pray for my Jewish friends, I can love my Jewish friends, but is there anything else? Is there any way I can get mobilized or make a difference? Can you help us out there?
Absolutely. So I started the Philos Action League actually in December, but the germ of the idea came back in May. You know, remember the conflict between Israel and Gaza. And I was asked by a Jewish publication to go and observe an anti-Israel rally in Teaneck, New Jersey. And Teaneck, for those who don't know, is like a community where it's mostly Orthodox Jewish people. And the rally was going to be on Saturday, and there was a lot of fear around what was going on, because there was situations all across the country where, like, Jews would be sitting at a restaurant and they'd get attacked, or a Molotov cocktail was thrown in the Diamond District in New York City. And so there was a lot of incidences of just random attacks against Jewish people, and there's a lot of fear in the community. And I thought, I'm just not going to go there as just a casual observer. I'm going to go there and be a supporter. So actually on the way, I went by CVS, picked up a cardboard sign and a marker, and I wrote, "I support Israel and Jews." And so it's me on one side of the fence, and on the other side of the fence is about 250 Palestinian activists, and they're screaming at me, yelling at me, and mocking me. And I thought to myself, I'm choosing this, but my Jewish friends don't get to choose this kind of mockery. And I thought to myself, I'm gonna stand with the Jewish people whenever I get a chance. And so that got me going to be one of those guys that just commits to showing up, right? Beyond the hashtag activism, beyond the social media declarations, actually physically showing up. And so, when the hostage situation took place near Dallas, I called up a partner organization of ours, and I said, "Hey, why don't you guys organize a vigil outside of the synagogue?" And so they did that. Church nearby organized a vigil about 7 p.m. About 40 people showed up to just pray for the Jewish people. And it's little acts like that make a difference. I mean, there was an attack on a restaurant here in New York City. Anti-Semitic graffiti was drawn all over the restaurant, and I, with about a dozen friends of mine, just showed up to have a meal. And we call that at the Philos Project incarnational advocacy, right? So incarnational means like in the flesh, right? And so we are those that are committing ourselves to physically showing up when some kind of anti-Semitic incident happens, just to be an actual physical presence. And that's what the Philos Project and the Philos Action League are all about.
Well, again, if you'd like to know a little bit more, we have those links, and I would hope that you join with them. If not actually face-to-face and in presence, maybe at least in spirit. And that is, again, another way that you can be involved. Of course, we have some other suggestions on our little booklet on anti-Semitism, which, again, I'm just going to have to update because there have been so many incidents since then, and also a lot more that has happened in Congress. But we'll leave that for another day, because I did want to point people also to your YouTube channel. And just a little less than 2 weeks ago, you did a very good kind of roundtable discussion on Ukraine, Russia, and the Near East. Now, many people would not see the connection. So can you start maybe by helping us see the connection? Because if your focus has been primarily on the Middle East, what does Ukraine and Russia have to do with it? Can you help us out?
Yeah, well, the thing is, Russia is one of the great powers of the world, right? I mean, obviously, it sits on the UN Security Council, but it's very much involved, and it has been for a long time, involved in the Middle East as well. I mean, it was very involved in Syria. It was in Syria because its largest warm water port, I mean, it's warm water because it doesn't freeze in wintertime like a lot of their other ones do, is actually in Syria. And it's one of the reasons they were so adamant in defending Syria. The Assad regime during its civil war was because it feared losing that warm water port. It's been allied with Iran in that conflict in Syria, and has been generally kind of mucking around in the space for a long time. And so a lot of people looked at Syria and they looked at how Russia did during its time there, and thought, it's basically testing out its troops, it's testing out its weaponry on the front lines in Syria. And so when it then turned its attention to Ukraine, obviously it had trained troops. Mind you, it seems to not have gone as well as it did before. But you also have to think that, energy is a big driver for this conflict, whether it's pipelines to Europe. Back in 2008, most people don't remember that, Russia invaded the country of Georgia. And why did it invade the country of Georgia? Because at the time, Georgia was had the last pipeline that was not controlled by Russia coming out of the Middle East.
Yes.
And so once they took over Georgia, they took control of that pipeline's line, and they controlled it all. And the same thing is happening today, Ukraine. You cannot ignore the backdrop of this. It's very important.
Well, again, when we come to the next hour, after my first interview, we'll get into a little bit more of some of the kind of historical background of Ukraine and Russia, the connection between the two, even answering the question that I get sometimes, why did they change the name of the capital from Kiev to Kyiv? And there's a good reason for that as well. So we'll get into all of that. But I did want to, just before we run out of time, encourage people to click on some of these buttons, because this will give them a chance to watch some of the conversation on your YouTube channel. If they go to thephilos.org, there's a place where they can learn more about this particular project. They could even use this in terms of being a leader. There's a place where they can learn, and most importantly for you, there's a place where they can actually go to the Philos Action Fund if they'd want to do that. So just before we are winding down today, talk about that, because I know you had a campaign during Christmas for Coptic Christians. I know you're going to have some other projects, so kind of give us a vision of what you will be doing and how people can get involved with you.
Well, I really appreciate the time. The Philos Action Fund, like you said, our campaign that we had for Christmas was to help the Coptic community in the region. We tend to try and focus on helping to strengthen the indigenous Christian communities. I'm a big fan of, obviously I was in missions for 12 years, and I'm a big fan of missionary endeavors, but these historic indigenous Christian communities that have been in these regions since the times of the Bible need to be encouraged. They need to be lifted up, and they need to be strengthened. I think, the Apostle Paul calls us to do good to all men, but first the household of faith.
Yes.
And so our efforts around encouraging Christian support for Jews, really actually those starts with Christian support for other Christians. And sadly, in the nearly 15 years that I've been involved in kind of the intersection of faith and politics, the hardest group to raise money for that I've seen in the entire world has been for the persecuted Christians. So encourage Christians to stand with us in that.
Luke Moon, thank you for joining us again. Philos Project, we'll take a break, and we have a lot more to cover in this next hour. Stay tuned. We'll have more right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests, by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to spend some time, first of all, talk about this issue of sexual trafficking, and a topic we've addressed so often here on Point of View, because we are going to be talking about something that's a little bit more controversial. Parental advisory is in order, but again, we'll be very careful about how we communicate all of this, and I think it will be an encouragement to you, and also, again, give you some action items that you can take with you. And then before we end this hour, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about some of the news out of Ukraine, also a very important prayer target. We want to bring to the microphone Andi Buerger, and she is an individual who really was victimized since an infant, spent 17 years subjected to abuse and sexual trafficking at the hands of, if you can believe it, her own family. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. She's been, of course, a speaker for federal and local law enforcement agencies, an individual who eventually earned her law degree, also has had a life of business success and the creation of a very incredible resource that is available in Oregon. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. And we also, in addition to a link to her website and information that you'd want to know about her, also have a link to a book that I've heard about, have not had a chance to read, A Fragile Thread of Hope, One Survivor's Quest to Rescue. And Andi, it is a delight to bring you on the program.
Well, Kirby, thank you for having me. It's a genuine honor to be on the show.
Well, we want to educate our listeners, and I guess the best way to do that is for you, if you could, to share your story, which I know you've shared many times before. A lot of that is in the book, and because of your real desire to actually be part of what is now called Voices Against Trafficking, it really goes back to really your birth and infancy. Can you explain that to us?
Absolutely. Back before there was a term called human trafficking, when we were barely talking about child abuse publicly, back in the early 60s and 70s, I was trafficked by all immediate and some extended family members from the age of 6 months to 17 years old. As hard as it is to say or for people to hear, my birth mother was the primary predator and orchestrator of, such evil things. And by the time I was 5, the physical abuse, the sexual issues, the other things, since, we're on a public forum here, that happened were so great that I felt it would be better to leave this earth than to stay, because she had made it clear that she could take my life anytime she wanted. So there wasn't anywhere to go to, no place to run at that time. And as a minor, I would have been sent back. Even when I was an older minor, I was sent back a couple of times. So I thought, I'm just going to take care of it myself. And I went to the curb of my house, and I sat there waiting for a car to be coming by fast enough to jump in front of. And that's where God met me, Kirby. He really spoke to my heart. And I know some people don't think God speaks to kids, but he sure did that day, because I heard this voice in my heart saying, this is not the plan I have for you. Suicide is not the answer. And for a little kid of 5 who didn't trust anybody, some reason I trusted that voice. And so I went back up to the garage, and I leaned against it, and I basically said to no one in particular, if you keep me alive, I'll do whatever you call me to do. And that blind faith. And it was a very hard, tumultuous childhood. Fast forward to 17, which was the last time my birth mother tried to kill me.
Just incredible story. But again, I want to really point people to the website, which we have posted, Voices Against Trafficking, because you have actually argued that there's a strength of many voices speaking as one. And although we've had different individuals over the years, Andi, that have in one way or another faced abuse, or in some cases we've had those who've been trafficked, this is something which is now reaching finally something that I could say is a critical mass. Because I remember even when we started covering this, and this is 3 studios earlier, so this goes back quite a number of years, there were people calling in saying, look, if this is the issue that you say it is, Kirby, I kind of trust you, but still, if this is as bad as you say it is, I'd see this in the mainstream media. I'd hear about this. And fortunately, about that time, we had a member of Congress that stepped in to begin to address this issue. But we've gone from nobody believed it to now everybody knows it's a problem, and we want to now try to make this no longer anything other than a footnote in history. So that's really kind of what you're doing in terms of this whole website, voicesagainsttrafficking.com. People don't even have to know how to spell it because we've got it on our website. But talk about what people will find at that website, because it's a great resource that you have.
Well, thank you. Yes, our goal was to, one, create greater awareness, educate the public. A lot of people don't really understand, even though they're hearing about it now. They look at the Epstein or Maxwell or some of the other national headlines, and that's all they really know. So between creating awareness, educating the general public, we hope to inspire action. And the more voices, of course, the more powerful. So on the site, we have helplines and hotlines. If you see something, say something. There are safe ways to call out or report. If you feel like you're on the edge of being an abuser or something, with a couple of years of lockdowns and craziness in the world, some people, may feel a little fragile, and they may have kids in the home. So we want them to be able to get help too. You'll also see how to add your voice. We have a campaign going to get 1 million names by the end of summer next year on a roster so that we can continue affecting legislation that will really help victims and help turn the tide against the predators. Arizona did that recently, and they have a law now that says if you are caught doing any of these things, you will get life in prison with no early release and no early parole. You're locked down for the rest of your life. So things like that. We are very much advocates. We have interceded in some rescues, and we hope other people will join us by adding their voice, which doesn't cost anything, or becoming a member, and there are ways to be a member. We are a nonprofit, so that helps us keep our national forums going, our international programs that we provide every quarter. The next one's March 30th, in fact, so that, again, you hear many voices speaking as one, because collectively we're stronger.
Let me just, before we take a break, just mention that one place where you can go is a button that you can click on that says add your voice. You just mentioned that very quickly, but I think it's worth mentioning that that's where you can put your voice to that roster, and then, of course, leave your email so you'll get some of the updates there as well. And I also would say that it would be very important for people maybe to click on that button that says helplines and hotlines. You never know where you'll need something that would be appropriate and necessary, but I do know this. We are broadcasting today from Dallas. We're back in our normal studio here in Dallas, and just down the road at the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, there was an airline, I guess I could mention, it was American Airlines ticket agent, saw 2 girls bubbling, really excited, both booking a one-way ticket to New York City. Now, again, I think there would be some that go, well, whatever. But she asked some more questions, and they said, oh, well, we're going to go, and they're going to do some modeling. And all of a sudden, the lights went on. Whoop, 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 whoop. Wait a minute. And she called in. Of course, when you have access to hotlines, you have access to law enforcement. It turns out they would have probably been trafficked. So there is a good example of somebody who was at least having it front of mind and saw the potential danger. So you can go to that website. It's probably the best list of the hotlines and helplines there. But I have a lot more to talk to with Andi. We'll take a break, continue our conversation with her right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
As I've been out speaking, one question surfaces with some regularity. People wonder if what happened to the truckers in Canada could happen to citizens in the U.S. I always acknowledge that anything can happen in this country if we aren't working to defend our liberties, but there is an important difference between the two countries. We share a great deal of similarities in our language and even in our legal and political structure. Although there is a border between Canada and the U.S., it is a relatively easy task to move across the border. One country feels like the other country. The difference can be seen in how the two countries treat political rights and liberties. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms grants their citizens various rights. The U.S. Declaration and Constitution acknowledges the existence of these rights, and it may seem like a small difference, but it makes all the difference in the world. To put it simply, if government gives you rights, then the government can take them away. All it takes is an emergency for the government to suspend them temporarily or even permanently. Our Constitution doesn't grant you rights. It acknowledges that those rights exist and government cannot infringe upon them. The Declaration makes that clear that rights come from God because they were endowed by Him. They can't be set aside as easily as they were in Canada. But perhaps you're thinking that we did see many of our rights set aside during the pandemic. That is true. We let it happen. But we still do have a constitutional government with several judges in our federal court system willing to protect those rights. Unfortunately, many of the liberals in government today are willing to turn our country's governmental system into one that looks more like Canada's system. That is why we need to evaluate the candidates running for office this year. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue the conversation today about trafficking with Andi Buerger. And I might just mention we have quite a number of resources, but again, you can click on the button that will take you to voicesagainsttrafficking.com. We also, of course, have a way in which you can follow her on Twitter or Facebook. And I would encourage you to get involved, especially also we have posted her book that came out a number of years ago, A Fragile Thread of Hope, One Survivor's Quest to Rescue. And so, again, some great material. And I wanted to point out some of the ways in which our listeners can get involved, because, Andi, we do have individuals that are kind of activist-oriented. And so, first of all, you have this idea of charter members. By the way, I noticed one of your charter members is Donna Rice Hughes. We've had her on the program before, and we owe a debt of gratitude to her. And, of course, I mentioned a member of Congress. That's, of course, Linda Smith, who I would suspect you know as well. If it weren't for some of those people in those early days, most people wrote me off because we have been trying to cover this issue of trafficking and talked about some of the dangers that happen during sporting events and all the rest. And I cannot tell you the number of people that thought we had pretty much lost our minds by talking about it, because the argument was, if this is really happening, why is it when I talk to somebody in the police force, they say they don't know anything about it? Or why is it when I open up my newspaper, I don't see it in the newspaper, back when we were reading newspapers? That actually had to gain some credibility, and people like former Congresswoman Linda Smith provided some of the credibility that obviously I didn't have.
Exactly. And again, every voice counts, right? Every voice should matter. And sometimes you need higher voices. We have some Congress members from both sides of the fence who have supported us from the beginning. And as you saw the list of charter members that began this journey with me, God nudged me in the middle of the night. He said, more voices, get more voices. And so that's what I set out to do. And we have, together with Donna Rice Hughes and many others, you mentioned the travel industry. One of our members, Nancy Rivard, with Airline Ambassador, she trains all airlines about, human trafficking. So we have collectively brought a lot of people into this. But again, to your point, no one wants to think about the elephant in the national room, let alone in our neighborhood. But in Kirby, we know statistically, factually, that every 40 seconds in America, a child 18 years or under is abducted or lured into something they think is safe, and then, taken into a trafficking ring or other such things. But as adults, every human has rights, and every human's rights should be protected. That's the way it should be. And when we talk about human trafficking, that truly, in my opinion, is a crime against humanity, because we're saying, well, the kids don't count, or the youth don't count, or the college students don't count. We can use them. But also, as far as law enforcement goes, I deal with that all the time. I can't tell you how many calls, even in my own area in Central Oregon, the district attorney publicly said he doesn't believe human trafficking exists because he doesn't prosecute it. And that any person that chooses to be involved in very old popular trade at 18, chooses to be in that trade. And that's not true either. Those are myths. Some people maybe, but for the majority, anyone who's been victimized in any way doesn't always have the resources or the help or the hope that it will change. And so they just take what they get.
Again, let's just mention that you're in Redmond, Oregon. It's kind of north of Bend. I know where it is because I've lived in Oregon. Matter of fact, every year I go to Oregon and actually teach at the coast. But somehow I got to figure out a way to drive in from Salem or Eugene to come and see you. But let's talk about what you have there as well, because in addition to Voices Against Trafficking, in addition to your book, A Fragile Thread, you also have a very significant place to help individuals that have been trafficked. Can you talk about that?
Yes, my husband and I started Beulah's Place almost 14 years ago in 2008 to help rescue at-risk homeless teens, some of which had been trafficked, some had been just criminally abandoned and neglected, other reasons. And we just felt like there was a purpose and a plan for each of them. But like me, I didn't know that until quite later in life. And so we sought out to do that. We created a safe house system. And over the years, as we gained more successes, we got some national attention, and that's kind of how we grew. And basically, through the Safe House system, we assisted or rescued 300 plus kids in that time period. We housed 50 of them and got them reintegrated into community, and we've put 8 through college. A couple more are graduating. So, God was very good to us, and it makes what I speak about worth it for one. And that's kind of why I do that. So we did that, and that was the mustard seed for Voices Against Trafficking being birthed.
Let's talk about how you can help others and then how they can help you. Because first of all, we have, for the years, really encouraged people to learn from what's happening with pregnancy resource centers and to develop something like that in their community. And what you've learned from doing Beulah's Place and some other things could be developed and replicated all over the country. We broadcast in approximately 40 states, and there are a lot of places where I think a church or a group of really involved Christians could put together something like that, and they could kind of learn vicariously from you. You've had to learn experientially, but they could learn vicariously and maybe avoid some of the mistakes you made. So are you available for that kind of training and teaching?
Absolutely. I would love to do that because, it's all about duplication and discipling. And so if they reach out to me through voicesagainsttrafficking.com, there's a way to contact us, and I will get that email directly. I would love to help anyone who would like to start something like that in their own area, as well as, if any churches, a lot of times churches in particular don't know how to approach this subject, and I encourage them, get a speaker who can give your congregations and your audiences the the basic things and the hope, in a palatable way. We don't want to terrify people, but we do want them maybe to be a little uncomfortable. But there's lots of ways to help and to absolutely duplicate this program. No problem. So I'd be happy to.
Can they schedule you as a speaker, maybe at an event or something like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is what I do. This is my calling. And, as long as God gives me the breath, I will speak.
Let's also then talk about how people can help you. If they click on the button that says join us, there's membership levels and things of that nature. And so, again, this would be a way that I could continue your ministry, but also find out a little bit more about how to maybe replicate what you have been able to develop and to actually add more voices to this very important issue of trafficking. So talk about what is available when people do click on some of those buttons.
Yeah, absolutely. When they click on the join us buttons, we have what we call like lifetime memberships. And so whether it's the $50 lifetime membership, that helps us, cover internet and phones, things like that. And if it's, a little bit more, somebody has a little bit extra and they want to actually, do a $250 or become a platinum member, maybe they have a company that can do $1,000 so that we can continue producing the awareness videos, the campaigns, and the resources like another book, the Voices Against Trafficking book, which you'll have a copy of, and things like that. That would be great. All of that goes to helping us continue the messaging locally, nationally, and internationally. We have people from other countries saying, can you help us? What can we do? So we're working together so that no one else has to suffer. And while we can't get rid of depraved nature, we can certainly limit the number of predators and the profit that is being made off of our children and off of human beings.
Might mention, too, that you have these online forums. You got one taking place later this month and different quarters. So there's all sorts of resources that we have tried to make available to you. So if you can go directly to their website or else simply go to our website, which will take you to voicesagainsttrafficking.com, then you'll find charter members, helplines, hope lines, a way to contact her if you would like to get more information, maybe have her come and speak, add your voice, donate, join, all sorts of great resources. So, Andi, I appreciate you sharing your story. I encourage people also to click on that other button, maybe read your book. And thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you, Kirby. Bless you and your viewers and listeners. Thank you so much.
Again, I've seen a remarkable change. There was a time in which people said, I don't really think trafficking is happening. Then people sort of fell back and said, well, okay, maybe it's happening in Cambodia, Thailand, but it's not happening here. I think we finally reached critical mass. Most people recognize it's an issue, and we have been able to bring some really good voices on the program about that. And this is one more voice that I thought you might want to know about. So if this is something you might want to get involved with or maybe like to replicate something similar in your community, we've given you the resources. Simply go to our website, pointofview.net. When we come back from the break, time to talk about Ukraine. I'll try to give you a little bit of an update. First, maybe just a little bit of history. I found that a lot of people don't know some of the basics in terms of the religious background of Ukraine. Of course, we've just recently been at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, have some stories to tell about that. So we'll finish that off. And, of course, if you have comments or questions, as always, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break, come back, and focus some time on what's happening in Ukraine right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Well, half hour. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me, as a program note, mention that tomorrow we're going to be, since we were talking about this idea of sexual trafficking, talk about the other aspect of that, about men that are actually held hostage to sexual sin. And J.S. Sheldon will be with us. His book, Unmuzzled. Could sexual sin be holding you hostage from God's appointed destiny for your life? Josh McDowell says every man should read this book. And so we'll be talking about that and then get back into all sorts of issues in the news. I might just mention that on Wednesday, we have Arthur Brooks with us. Dr. Arthur Brooks has been with us before. I have used so many of his books over the years, and he hasn't written that many, but he just always writes really helpful books. One years ago that came out having to do with the fact that when you look at giving, it's entitled Who Cares and Who Gives. Basically, liberals talk about giving, but conservatives are the ones that actually give. And so when you look at the amount of money they give, well, there's not even a comparison. Matter of fact, a comparison between non-Christians and Christians. Of course, Christians tend to give more than non-Christians. You would expect that in terms of tithing and giving. But it's not just that. They give more of their time. One of the examples that he used, and I've used this before, that actually conservatives give more blood than liberals do. As a matter of fact, if the rest of the nation gave blood at the rate that conservatives did, we would never have a blood shortage, which just shows you again that some people talk about giving and talk about compassion, but it tends to be the conservatives and the Christians, using those in different categories, that actually are the ones that are rolling up their sleeves and getting involved. Well, then he wrote a whole series of books dealing with the idea of the free enterprise system and capitalism and those kinds of things. Great books. More recently, he's written about the idea that people that have earned success are more fulfilled and are happy. So we're going to take on his book on happiness. He has been, and again, just an incredible individual that actually played the French horn in symphonies around the world. I think last symphony he was playing in Spain, if I remember right. I think it was Barcelona or whatever. And then left, got his doctorate, was a professor at Syracuse, actually, when he wrote one of those first books. And then up until fairly recently has been at the American Enterprise Institute. I believe now he's at the Kennedy School at Harvard University. But anyway, we'll follow him. And this one on happiness, good book. Anyway, just want to give you a feel for the fact that all through the week, we will keep watching what's happening in Ukraine. We'll keep watching some of the other issues in Congress. But also, I want to, every once in a while, bring to you individuals that are certainly good researchers, good communicators, good authors, or people involved in various activities. And if you go to the website today, you can see that I've already done interviews with 3 different individuals. I thought while we have a few more minutes today, I would do a little bit on Ukraine. And in part, maybe share a few things I shared with my Sunday school class, because I found that there are a lot of issues that we talk about here on Point of View, or should be talking about on Point of View, that are just never covered in the mainstream press. And one of those came with somebody the other day saying, why is it we no longer talk about the capital being Kiev, but Kyiv? Okay, well, that's kind of a good question. And it turns out that, first of all, you got to understand that in Ukraine and in Russia, they use what's called a Cyrillic alphabet. Okay, you with me on that? They look a little bit different. They're not like the Latin alphabet. And so if you look at the Cyrillic alphabet for the capital, the way Russians used to pronounce those letters, it came out sounding in our English like Kiev. Well, Ukraine, sort of wanting to move away from Russia, decided that they would use, as would make sense, the way Ukrainians would actually pronounce those Cyrillic words, and that's why we go from Kiev to Kyiv. That, I think, illustrates something, and that is there has been a desire on the part, not of everybody in Ukraine, but a lot of people in Ukraine, to really see them as different than Russia. They, of course, also understand that for a long time, Mother Russia and Ukraine were one and the same. My best example of that is Mikhail Gorbachev. Some of you younger kids maybe don't know who he is, but I think most people do. If you're old at all, you know Mikhail Gorbachev was the head of the Russian government. But most people don't realize that on his father's side, they were Russian, but on his mother's side, they're Ukrainian. His mother was Ukrainian. All his maternal family were Ukrainian. He grew up listening and hearing Ukrainian songs sung to him. So whereas we see a distinction between Russia and Ukraine, Mikhail Gorbachev never really saw it that way, and I guarantee you Vladimir Putin doesn't see it that way as well. While I'm picking on Vladimir Putin for just a minute, let me also mention something else. This came from a piece by David French. I should have posted that today, but maybe we'll post it tomorrow so we'll have more time to talk about it, in which he points out that if you were to go to maybe somebody in the Russian Orthodox Church and say, where's kind of the, if you were, the Jerusalem of your denomination, the Jerusalem of your religion, where we would say as Christians, where's our Jerusalem? Well, it's Jerusalem. Pretty obvious, right? Where is it for Jews? Jerusalem. But if you're talking about where the denomination, or they would just say their religion started, they would say Kiev or Kiev. So in some respects, when we see this as a separate country, this is the foundational point of what today we think of as the Russian Orthodox Church and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. It goes all the way back to this capital that Vladimir Putin and the Russian military are trying to actually take over right now. That explains, it doesn't justify, I'm not agreeing with it, I'm just trying to explain it for a minute. That at least explains why you see these really almost bizarre statements sometimes being made by Vladimir Putin of wanting to extend Christendom. Yeah, by killing people. I mean, he's essentially become a war criminal. I suspect someday he will be brought before the Hague for war crimes. But again, sees this as an important part of advancing this kind of religious idea. And maybe we will get into David French's piece, because he reminds us in that piece that really this war taking place in Ukraine. Oh, I know you're not supposed to say war right now. The United Nations is not allowed to say the word war. It's called a military intervention or invasion or something of that nature. It's the first casualty in war sometimes is the language. But anyway, let's back to this, that many of those individuals, when they're talking about this idea of the war, are really seeing that as sort of a religious war. And David French was saying you see the best and the worst. The best in that you've got the Slavic Gospel Association, you've got Samaritan's Purse, you've got all sorts of really wonderful organizations from a Christian point of view trying to help those individuals in Ukraine. At the same time, when a religious, justified, almost holy war is coming from this connection between the Russian Orthodox Church and Vladimir Putin. Anyway, when we were broadcasting from the National Religious Broadcasters, I did mention a few things, but I thought I'd pick on those again, because this last week I had a chance to be at a breakfast, and sitting fairly close to me was Ed Cannon. Known him since he was president, or was he vice president? I can't remember exactly which, of at Moody Bible Institute, but now he's the president of Far Eastern Broadcasting Company. And one of the things he shared, interestingly enough, is that they, during COVID, helped a lot of these Ukrainian churches develop web pages and use the internet so that they could interact with their various members, since they couldn't come to the churches. Well, now that we've had this war taking place, those web pages and the streaming have allowed them to continue to communicate with their parishioners, and that has been a real positive. They did talk about this one Ukrainian leader who actually took his wife and his 5-year-old, I believe it was son, wrapped in a blanket to the Polish border, dropped them off, and then turned right around to actually fight in Ukraine. So you just got to love some of the incredible sacrifices these people are making. And when we were at the Bot Radio Network, one of the guests they had there's Ukrainian. I'd like to see if I can get him on. But he says that their best estimates are this may be the greatest evangelistic harvest in the history of Ukraine. So as sad as it is of all the turmoil that is taking place there, it also has been a time in which so many individuals are actually coming to know the Lord. And I think that's really very encouraging indeed. And of course, the other day when we were talking about the whole issue of these biolabs, when you had Senator Marco Rubio asking the Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons? I'm sure he was expecting the answer to be no. And instead she said, no, well, actually, they do have biological labs there, and we're really concerned about Russia getting a hold of them, which leads, at least to some of us, with a little bit of curiosity, which seems to have escaped our friends at the mainstream press. Well, those of us that are a little more curious say, Why did it take 17 years to get rid of those, or were these ongoing projects? And even if they were, didn't anybody think that it would be possible that Russia might invade and get access to them? And these are the kind of questions at least you hope some members of Congress would ask, because I don't really see a whole lot of questions coming from some of the establishment press. I'll give credit where credit is due. There's some, but not a whole lot. It just came and went. And we're going to keep watching those issues because I think it's important. Anyway, let's take a break. We got more to cover right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let me just mention that, of course, we will be talking tomorrow about some of the impact that the war in Ukraine is having, not only on the Ukrainian people, not only on the Russian people, but even on the Americans. Matter of fact, I just checked with Doug a minute ago, our engineer, and where are we right now? I guess 102 for the barrel of oil, and back when it was 70, we can remember that. It went up to, I think, a high of 138. So this will have an impact. And again, I know our Secretary of Transportation was real helpful, saying, well, just buy a Tesla. First of all, most people cannot do that. Second of all, these electric cars aren't necessarily always the solution. And more importantly, it isn't just the gas that you put in your car or your truck. It's the gas that is used by other people to get food to you, to get various services to you, to get various supplies to you, everything goes up when the price of gasoline goes up. I know that's hard for somebody who has pretty much never had a position in the federal government until he became Treasury Secretary, Transportation Secretary, but nevertheless, something to point out. Just before we wind down, 2 points. First of all, we posted a piece on Are We at War? But even before we get to that, are there some lessons we can learn? Here's an idea. When a dictator says that he will attack a country, I know, why don't we believe them? And this came from our friends at the Wall Street Journal. They said, take autocrats literally and seriously when they tell us what they intend to do. They were arguing we really shouldn't be that shocked by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin has been telling the world for years what he was going to do. Let's go back a couple of years ago in the Munich Security Conference. Vladimir Putin criticized the European security order and even criticized this expansion of NATO and warned at that time that further enlargement of NATO could be a serious provocation that would justify a Russian response. That sounds pretty clear. Well, that same year, you might remember we had a proxy war in Georgia, and we just talked about that a few minutes ago with Luke Moon. That's where they used Russian separatists to lead a military action. Then later, 7 years after that, you, of course, have them actually going into Crimea. Remember that during President Obama's administration. And for years, Vladimir Putin has been referring to Ukrainians and Russians as a single people. Okay, well, that makes it pretty clear to me that he would like to reunite those particular countries. Let's move to another place where they want to reunite some countries. That would be China. Yes, because Xi Jinping has talked about wanting to have the unification of Taiwan with mainland China. He's talked about ethnic solidarity. And more recently, have you seen all of the flights and the military exercises, all implying some kind of military action against Taiwan? So just as we failed to really believe Putin, are we now going to have our people in the State Department fail to believe Xi Jinping? I think when you look at the Chinese repression of the pro-freedom demonstrators, basically, in Hong Kong, I think it shows the lengths to which they go. How about the actually the extermination and the concentration camps for the Uyghurs and all sorts of other things? I think we could believe that. And if you've picked up your newspapers lately, or most of us don't read newspapers anymore, but you've gone out on the internet or watched some television or radio, you've heard that this administration is trying to do an Iranian nuclear deal. Can you remember when we had Joel Rosenberg in studio here and giving us quote after quote about what Iranian leaders said that they would want to do with a nuclear weapon? Just an hour ago, we talked with Luke Moon talking about the idea that many of these Muslims said they want to go after the Saturday people first, and then they'll come to the Sunday people. In terms of would they want to use a nuclear weapon against Israel? I think we know the answer there. Would they want to use a nuclear weapon against the United States? So here's one of my suggestions. I know it might be really radical, but the next time you hear a dictator or an autocrat say something, let's maybe assume that they really mean what they say. We should listen to what they say, and I would suggest that we should believe it when they say it. And that brings me to our last piece. One of the articles that we've posted here is by Kevin Williamson. It's entitled, Are We at War? And I think some of you might go, what? Oh, well, no, we're not at war with Russia. I mean, we haven't declared war on Russia, but even if we may be indirectly involved in providing military hardware. But my argument is, consider that very few of us as Americans thought we were at war with radical Islam until 9/11. The radical Muslim leaders were at war with us, but our leaders and a lot of the country just dismissed a lot of the earlier attacks on our military. And so Kevin Williamson makes the argument that the United States is a belligerent if Vladimir Putin thinks that the United States is a belligerent. That's a really sobering thought if you think about that, because ultimately it says that Vladimir Putin can make up any kind of pretext to attack the U.S. or NATO. Look at the pretext he used to go into Ukraine, and that's where he is right now. And so, again, he's carrying out military operations, and we're not sure where he will stop. And I thought it was kind of interesting because Kevin Williamson said that one of the issues associated with this would be that we did not want to be provocative by sending MiG-29 fighter jets from Poland to Ukraine, because they would have first been sent to Ramstein Air Base in Germany. And the administration, the Biden administration, seemed to be a little concerned that that might look like U.S. and NATO were carrying out military operations against Russia in Ukraine. And so you have to begin to wonder, is it possible that Vladimir Putin might want to attack us? Maybe not militarily, but I have a commentary coming out this Friday on the cyber attack possibility. Anyway, we can talk about that. But I love what he says. This MiG fiasco underlined the Biden administration's predictable fecklessness and disorganization. America needed a Keystone pipeline, but instead we got the Keystone cops. And ultimately, he also goes on to say that this administration's really been hoping that the fighting will stay in Ukraine. But will it? I mean, cyber attacks don't have to stay just right there. And frankly, as he says, the only thing that will cause Vladimir Putin to stay in Ukraine is if Vladimir Putin thinks that staying in Ukraine is a good idea. But he may decide to move his troops to some of the other countries. Do you see how close some of those missiles landed? Close to Poland? Have you seen their desires to move into Moldova? Quite possible. Rather than just staying tied down to a quagmire in Ukraine, he might want to take it somewhere else. So the bottom line is, we may not think we're at war with Russia, but Vladimir Putin may not see it that way. And that's one of the reasons why I posted that article for you to see. What's the future? Hard to tell, but one individual that you might want to listen to is the current CIA director, William Burns. William Burns is an individual that used to be the ambassador to Russia. I've said before that apart from maybe, Condoleezza Rice, I think William Burns and a few others probably know the mindset of Vladimir Putin any more than anybody else. And the other day when he was testifying in front of Congress, he said, I think what's going to happen is Vladimir Putin is going to double down. And said that there are 4 different assumptions that Vladimir Putin made, and all of them turned out to be incorrect. It didn't turn out the way he wanted it to be, but he's convinced that he will double down and be even more aggressive. And so we'll be following that every single day. But if over the last 2 hours we haven't mentioned anything that you want to pray about, then I guess we failed. But I hope you'll be praying about a lot of things we've been talking about here on Point of View. Just before we go, let me first of all thank Doug. Thank you for being our engineer today. Ivy, thank you for being our producer, since our other producer's over in Spain right now. And I hope that you will join us tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? Pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.